Hey folks, tonight we're diving into ancient Greece, that olive oil soaked civilization famous for philosophy, democracy, and statues that totally skipped Pants Day. But behind all the Plato, Sparta, and golden temples, there's a way grittier truth. Sure, ancient Greece gave us the roots of Western civilization, but it also handed everyday people a daily grind that today's survivalists would call a nightmare. So before you get too comfy, take a sec to like the video and subscribe only if you actually dig what I'm doing here. And drop a comment telling me where in the world you're tuning in from and what time it is. It's always fun to see who's joining the party from around the globe. Now, turn off the lights, crank the fan for some white noise, and let's enjoy tonight's journey together. Welcome to ancient Greece, where your day doesn't start with an alarm clock, but with the sun turning your house into a slow cooker. Your humble abode, made of sun-baked mud bricks or rough stone, with tiny, glassless windows and just wooden shutters to keep goats out, and if you're lucky, a breeze from the gods, no insulation, no ceiling fans, and definitely no privacy, unless you count the corner where the family goat refuses to sleep. You don't wake up early because you want to. You wake up because it's way too hot to stay lying down. Summer walls soak up heat like sponges, and when the sun rises, your tiny house radiates it right into your bones. In winter, those same walls turn into freezers, and basically, you're wrapped in a cloth, hoping you don't freeze into a statue. You probably slept on a thin mat or a straw-stuffed mattress, no pillow, just a rolled-up cloak or maybe your own arm. If you're lucky, the fleas didn't keep you up last night. But let's be honest, luck isn't on your side. No running water either. So your morning routine involves a trek to the public fountain, or if you're in the countryside, a nearby well. You carry water in clay jugs balanced on your shoulder, silently praying you don't trip and smash your week-long backache on the ground. To get clean, you skip the morning bath, if you bathe at all. Save it for the end of the day. You splash water on your face, rub some olive oil on your skin, then scrape it off with a curved metal blade. Think spa day, but without the spa, the day, or any of the fun. And forget privacy. Your whole family lives in one room. You sleep, eat, and argue over who tracked mud into the house, because the street doubles as your hallway, news feed, and trash dump. You haven't even eaten, and your back is already killing you. You're sweating, and your shirt sticks to places no shirt should ever stick to. And here comes the best part of your day. You survived the suffocating Greek-style bedroom. Time to refuel. Right. Welcome to ancient Greek breakfast. A meal so basic, it makes modern intermittent fasting look like a feast. Your first bite, barley bread, old, so dense, and about as exciting as the dirt it was baked on. It's called maza, made from crushed barley mixed with water, flattened and cooked on hot stones or embers from last night's fire. Think ancient granola bar, but without sweetness, texture, or joy. You might dunk it in diluted wine because, surprise, water isn't always safe to drink. No filters, no boiling, no clay jug in your pantry. So everyone, from toddlers to elders, drinks a cup of watered-down wine. Not to get drunk, but to survive. If you're rich, maybe you'll score a fig or two, some olives, or a bit of goat cheese. But let's be real, you're not rich. You're lucky if your bread isn't crawling with flies from yesterday and doesn't crack a tooth when you bite it. No coffee, no eggs, no fruit bowl, no honey unless you live near a decent beekeeper and know how to bribe him. The ashes from last night's fire. think ancient granola bar minus the sweetness, texture, or any joy, you might. Dunk it in watered-down booze because surprise water wasn't always safe to drink. No filters, no boiling, no clay jug in your pantry. So instead, everyone from toddlers to grandpas got a cup of booze mixed with water, not to get drunk, but to survive. If you were lucky, maybe you'd score a fig or two, some olives, or a bit of goat cheese. But honestly, you weren't lucky. Consider yourself blessed if your bread wasn't crawling with flies from the day before or cracking your teeth when you bit it. No coffee, no eggs, no fruit bowls, no honey unless you lived near a friendly beekeeper and knew how to grease his palm. And don't expect to sit and relax. Meals were served fast. No chairs, no forks, and definitely no mindfulness eating the day before and didn't crack a tooth biting into it. No coffee, no eggs, no fruit bowls, no honey unless you happen to live near a decent beekeeper and know how to grease their palms. And don't expect to just sit back and chill. Meals come fast. No chairs, no forks, and definitely no mindfulness eating. You chew, nod, and get back to work. Oh, and if you're a woman, forget about eating with the men. In many households, women and kids eat separately, usually after the men are done. So not only is the food lousy, you have to wait your turn to be disappointed. The irony is, ancient Greeks gave us symposia, fancy feasts, and poems about wine. But breakfast, not exactly poetry material. It was practical, dry, often burnt, but you still chewed it like a champ because it was the only thing standing between you and a day full of sunshine, hard labor, and arguing with philosophers. The hunger hit hard. Just try not to break your barley brick. Now that you've swallowed that ancient barley brick with a splash of wine, it's time to freshen up. Or, not really, because in ancient Greece, hygiene wasn't just about being clean. It was a ritual involving oils, soap that was a centuries away fantasy. Morning baths usually meant dumping cold water on yourself from a public fountain or a courtyard basin, unless you were lucky enough to live near a public bath, which most weren't. So no shampoos, minty body washes, or sponges unless you stole one from a diver inn. And instead, you went with olive oil. Yep, oil. You rubbed it on your skin not to moisturize, but to grab the dirt and sweat. Then you scraped it off with a curved bronze blade, which made you less greasy, but still a bit questionable. Imagine slathering salad dressing all over yourself, then scraping it off. That was your skincare routine. And if you think that sounds glamorous, remember everyone else was doing it too, usually naked, noisy, and in public, hygiene was a social event. In ancient Greece, privacy, forget it. Now, about teeth, no toothbrushes, no toothpaste. Maybe you rubbed your gums with crushed charcoal or rinsed with vinegar if you were feeling fancy. But mostly you just chewed on a twig and prayed for the best. Oral hygiene relied more on God's mercy than routine care. Body odor was everywhere. Deodorant, nope. Perfume, sure, if you could afford it. So you might dab some rose oil or myrrh on your neck before trekking 5 miles in sandals under the blazing Athens sun. The result, a unique blend of musk, dust, and Greek-style desperation. Laundry rare. Clothes got washed by beating them on rocks by the river. If you were poor, your tunic probably hadn't seen water since the last festival. In short, hygiene in ancient Greece wasn't about looking good or smelling nice. It was about being just a little less disgusting than yesterday. The oil and scrape method worked, but only briefly, especially when you were sweating in your tunic under the scorching sun. Yeah, ancient Greece gave us democracy, philosophy, and architecture, but a decent shower still waiting on that. Now that you've wiped off the oil to start your day, it's time to get dressed. And a heads up, your ancient Greek wardrobe is best described as minimalist and, at worst, utterly useless. You've got two choices, a chiton or a himation. Both are basically giant rectangles of linen that you wrap and pin with brooches or belt. No tailoring, no fitting, and definitely not made for windy days. One wrong gust, and your entire philosophical outlook is on full display. Forget underwear, nothing, and bras didn't exist. So unless you're a Spartan woman trained to sprint and wrestle, you just hope your pins hold and nobody notices your wardrobe malfunction looking like a loose curtain. Now shoes, if you're lucky. You own a pair of leather sandals. If not, it's barefoot time, meaning you'll be walking all day on sun-baked rocks, goat poop-strewn dirt, and whatever else the local market decided to drop on the road. Water from the last holiday season, basically. Hygiene in ancient Greece wasn't about looking good or smelling nice. It was about being slightly less gross than yesterday. Oil and scraping worked, but only temporarily, especially when you were sweating buckets under the blazing sun. Yes, ancient Greece gave us democracy, philosophy, and architecture, but a proper shower still waiting on that. So after wiping the oil off your skin to start a new day, it's time to get dressed. And heads up, your ancient Greek wardrobe is best described as minimalist and, honestly, pretty useless. You've got two choices, a chiton or a himation. Both are basically giant rectangles of linen you wrap and pin or belt. No tailoring, no fit, and definitely not designed for windy days. One wrong gust and your whole philosophical outlook gets exposed. Forget underwear? None, nada. Bras didn't exist. So unless you're a Spartan woman trained to sprint and wrestle, you just pray your pins hold and no one notices your wardrobe is doing its best curtain impression. Now, let's talk shoes. If you're lucky, you own a pair of leather sandals. If not, you're going barefoot. That means walking all day on sun-baked rocks, goat poop, and whatever else the local market left on the street. Imagine strolling through a frying pan in July while dodging donkey droppings. That's your daily commute. Of course, no sunscreen, no hats unless you're a farmer or sailor, and definitely no SPF because it's 450 BCE and science is still a rumor. The sun, Mr. Iron, doesn't care how philosophical you are. It will roast you. By noon, your shoulders are burnt, your feet filthy, and your linen cloak is stuck to you in 4 uncomfortably non-geometric spots. And don't forget, public nudity wasn't shocking in Greek society. You might spot naked guys working out in the gym, or even politicians giving speeches wearing almost permanently attached baseball caps. Now, if you're rich, your robes might be dyed as maybe light purple or saffron yellow, but most folks rock dull whites or browns because dyes were expensive, and nobody wants to waste fancy color on guys who fix fishing nets for a living. So you waddle through your day in a toga burrito, sunburned, sweaty, hoping your pins don't pop off in front of a nun. And the worst part, you've only finished half your work. Welcome to ancient Greece, where military service wasn't a job, it was a civic duty, a social expectation, and it might be light purple or turmeric yellow, but most folks wore drab whites or browns because dyes were crazy expensive, and no one wanted to waste fancy colors on guys who spent their days fixing fishing nets. So you wander around all day, wrapped like a sunburned, sweaty burrito toga, hoping your cloak pin doesn't pop off right in front of the nuns. And the worst part? You've only finished half your work. Welcome to ancient Greece, where military service isn't a job, it's a civic duty, social expectation, and sometimes a one-way ticket to an early grave. If you're a free male citizen, especially in Athens or Sparta, congrats. You're automatically a soldier, whether you like it or not. By your teens, you're trained in wooden weapons and marching in formation, the famous Greek battle tactic, shoulder to shoulder behind giant shields, hoping the guy next to you doesn't trip. In Sparta, boys start military training at age 7 with the brutal agagi system, a program that turns kids into warriors by starving them. Military training at 7, thanks to the brutal agagi system, a program that turned kids into warriors by starving, beating, and isolating them until only the toughest survived. In Athens, it was a bit softer, but still mandatory too. Years of training as a teen, then decades on call. You couldn't just say, I'm the thinking type. Even philosophers like Socrates fought in wars not with witty comebacks, but actual weapons. And guess what? There was always war. Sparta versus Athens, Athens versus Persia, Sparta versus everyone, or just some neighbor squabbling over a trade route. Conflict was basically a lifestyle. Peace. Just the commercial break between invasions. Armor, if you could afford it. You got a bronze helmet, a breastplate, greaves, a round shield, and a spear. If not, well, don't expect a front row seat at the battle. Leather and cloth didn't stop arrows. The worst part, you had to bring your own gear. Yep. Being a soldier was basically a DIY disaster. Poor citizens had to beg, borrow, or fight with the lightest weapons, which in Greek basically meant you were signing up for an early death. When not fighting, you were prepping, training, cleaning weapons, debating strategy in meetings, or rowing for hours in the Navy because those triremes don't row themselves. No veteran health care. No retirement, no therapy, just scars, limps, and the occasional crudely carved tombstone praising your virtue and courage. If you think being a man in ancient Greece was harsh, wait till you hear about women's lives. In most city-states, especially Athens, women had fewer rights than a fancy vase. No voting, no office, no land ownership, and rarely seen in public without a male escort. Actually, if you were spotted outside too often, whispers might start that you're a courtesan or worse, a Spartan. Let's start with your daily routine. You wake before sunrise to do housework. You spin wool, weave cloth, grind grain, fetch water, bake bread, manage slaves if you have them, and raise the kids. You're the CEO of the household, but with zero salary, respect, or days off. Your social life, forget it. No theater trips, no philosophy debates, no gym time. That was strictly for naked men. You're mostly stuck in the gyneceum, the women's quarters, only glimpsing the outside world through work and education windows. If lucky, you learn a bit of reading, but mostly you get trained in house chores, philosophy, rhetoric, geometry. That's for the boys. Your job, marry and pop out sons, and do it all while staying invisible. Marriages happened young, usually early teens, with some guy twice your age, arranged by your dad, who treated you more like a business deal than a person. Love was optional, dowries were mandatory, and once you had kids, your main value was your uterus. Now, Sparta was the exception. Spartan women were famously more liberated. They got educated, joined public life, and could own property. But before you get too jealous, remember their freedom came from a war obsession and state-sponsored eugenics. A Spartan woman's main job was to birth tough warriors or face disgrace. If your husband died, you didn't inherit much. No remarriage without permission. Your options shrank faster than your social circle. You were trapped legally, socially, and often physically. Mandatory. And when you have kids, your main value is your womb. Now, Sparta is the exception. Spartan women were known for being more liberated. They got educated, took part in public activities, and could own property. But before you get too jealous, remember their freedom came from a war obsession and state-sponsored eugenics. Your main job as a Spartan woman was to pop out strong warriors or face disgrace. And if your husband died, you didn't inherit much. You couldn't remarry without permission, and your options shrank faster than your social circle. You were legally and socially, and often physically stuck. Yeah. The Greeks worshipped powerful goddesses like Athena, Artemis, Hera, but real women. They were expected to be quiet, stay home, and out of sight. Ancient Athens is praised as the birthplace of democracy, and sure, technically that's true, but before you get too excited, let's be clear, you probably didn't qualify to join in. In fact, most Athenians were completely excluded from the democratic process to vote in the Athenian assembly. That means women, foreigners called medics, slaves, and kids. Nearly 90% of the population had zero political voice. Not exactly democracy for the people, it was democracy for a very specific club of sun-baked men in sandals. But if you ticked the boxes, you didn't just get to vote, you were expected to show up. All the time, laws got proposed, debated, and passed at big meetings with thousands of citizens. No professional politicians here. Every qualified guy was legislator, juror, and an amateur overly confident in all things. You might even get randomly picked to serve in powerful roles like treasury manager or juror through a lottery system. Sounds fun, right? Until you remember there were no qualifications required. One day, your fishmonger could be running military logistics. Your uncle, still believing in sea monsters, might be judging a murder case tomorrow. And if someone got too powerful, too famous, or just plain annoying, they got ostracized. Once a year, citizens could write a name on a broken pottery shard and ostrakhan and vote to exile that person for 10 years. No trial, no defense. Just go. You're too famous now, however flawed. Athenian democracy was revolutionary. It gave ordinary men a voice. Yeah, some regular dudes laid the groundworks for future political systems, but don't get it twisted, it wasn't fair or inclusive. If you were a woman, zip it. A foreign-born resident who paid taxes, shut up. A slave building the Parthenon. Definitely silent. A philosopher asking too many questions might get executed. Democracy was born in ancient Greece, but if you showed up expecting equal political rights, you'd be politely escorted out with your own ostrakhan. In ancient Greece, slavery wasn't just accepted. Shocker. Even modest households had at least one slave, not because they were rich, but because slavery was so baked into society, it was as normal as sandals and sunburns. The idea that someone might not own another human being unthinkable. Slaves weren't a specific race or ethnicity. They came from conquered lands. Thracians, Cypriots, Syrians, even fellow Greeks from the wrong city at the wrong time. Some born slaves, others prisoners of war, kidnapped and sold. It was a booming, brutal market, and business was always good if you lived in Athens. Your slave probably did everything: cooking, fetching water, cleaning, babysitting, shopping, and standing silently at dinner. Some even handled business or managed households while their owners kicked back at the assembly, sipping watered-down wine and debating abstract ideas like justice. Peak irony. In the silver mines of Lorien, slaves, including kids, worked in horrific conditions, crawling through narrow tunnels in total darkness, breathing toxic dust, slowly dying for coins and civic pride. Some slaves were educated, teaching grammar and math, acting as secretaries, or even managing bank accounts. But don't get it twisted, they were still property. They could be beaten, branded, sold, or killed on a whim, with zero legal rights. A few won freedom, called freedmen, but never truly free. They still owed loyalty to their former masters and couldn't become citizens. No voting, no land ownership, just hoping for a better tomorrow. Peak irony alert. In the silver mines of Lorien, slaves, including kids, worked in horrific conditions, crawling through narrow tunnels in total darkness, breathing toxic dust, slowly dying. For coins and civic pride, some slaves were educated. They taught grammar and math, worked as scribes, or even managed bank accounts. But don't get it twisted, they were still property. They could be beaten, branded, sold, or killed at whim with zero legal rights. A few won freedom, called freedmen, but never truly free. They had to stay loyal to their old masters and couldn't become citizens. No voting, no land ownership, just hoping for a brighter tomorrow. And unlike later slave systems, there was no widespread abolition movement. Philosophers like Aristotle, yes. Aristotle justified slavery as natural and necessary. According to him, some people are just born to be slaves. How uplifting. Right, ancient Greece gave us ethics, democracy, and philosophy, but all built on the backs of people who were never allowed to speak, never allowed to vote, and never allowed to matter. And that's not a footnote. That's the foundation. Feeling a bit off now, ancient Greece? Too bad. Unless you lived next door to Hippocrates, your health plan was some vague herbs, divine intervention, and a whole lot of wishful thinking. Let's start with the basics. No hospitals as we know them, sick or hurt. Stay home. Maybe a neighbor knows a bit about Pegasus. Maybe a relative remembers a prayer to Asclepius, the healing god. Maybe your local temple has a snake you can pet for a little emotional support. That's it. The most famous Greek doctors were basically herbalists, philosophers, and gamblers rolled into one. They believed in 4 bodily humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. According to them, illness was just your fluids out of whack. So if you had a fever, you had too much blood time to bleed you dry. Coughing up phlegm, try starving yourself. Feeling down, blame the black bile. Maybe go for a walk or stare dramatically at the sea. Most treatments were just trial and error, plus garlic. You might get some crushed poppy seeds. Good luck with that. Boiled figs or a vinegar-soaked rag scraped from a goat's skin? Sometimes it worked, probably not. Did it hurt pretty much always? Surgery was rare, terrifying, and usually the last resort. No anesthesia, no antiseptics, even a tiny cut could get infected and kill you. Tools included iron knives, bone saws, and prayers. Lots and lots of prayers. And if you had to amputate, hope you brought something tough to bite down on. Midwives handled childbirth, which was dangerous even on a good day. The death rate for women and babies was alarmingly high. A tough birth, a stuck shoulder, a breech baby. And that was game over. If you were rich, you could call in a healer with some scrolls and special oils. If you were poor, you had to rely on local wisdom, home remedies, and pure stubbornness. Or you were toast, but at least they believed in rest, fresh air, and balanced diets. So, yeah, ancient Greek medicine left us with the Hippocratic Oath, and also boiled cabbage water. Yep. Healthcare in ancient Greece was mostly herbs, hope, and hanging in there. In ancient Greece, the theater was not just entertainment. It was a civic duty, a religious ritual, and sometimes a full-on mental workout. Let's start with the best part: free theater for the people, assuming you weren't a woman, slave, or foreigner, in which case, tough luck if you wanted to see anything. You'd enter a massive open-air theater built into a hillside, like the Great Theater of Dionysus in Athens, packed with thousands of sweaty citizens, and you'd be there all day. Seriously, all day. The Dionysia Festival ran from dawn to dusk with back-to-back plays, tragedies, comedies, and satyr plays. No intermissions, no snacks, and definitely no bathroom breaks unless you count a bush on the slope. Show up late or misbehave, and you'd not only get the stink eye, but maybe a fine. The shows themselves were wild. Emotional tragedies, murder, madness, war, gods wrecking families, over a dumb choice made 3 generations ago. You didn't come to laugh. You came to cry together. Then came the comedies, not your light family fun. These plays roasted politicians, philosophers, whole cities, and body parts with brutal accuracy. Imagine if Saturday Night Live and a college debate had a baby, then dressed it in a giant penis costume and put it on stage. Actors wore tall masks, platform shoes, and over-the-top costumes. Of course, all men, even in female roles. The chorus sang, danced, and shouted the city and bodily functions with scary precision. Imagine if Saturday Night Live and a college debate had a baby, then dressed it in a giant penis costume and put it on stage. Actors wore tall masks, platform shoes, and flashy costumes. Of course, it was all dudes, even for the female roles. The choruses sang, danced, and shouted their heads off, basically like ancient Greece's version of Twitter, just louder and draped in togas. And this was definitely not passive TV watching. The crowd was noisy, booing, whistling, throwing stuff, arguing mid-show. Theater was democracy with spotlights. If the play pissed you off, you let them know. If it moved you, you screamed, cried, and maybe even reconsidered your entire life. After the festival, judges voted on the winning playwright. Imagine having to go through 3 of those, days bawling over arrests, only to find out a light comedy about a talking pig. God took home the prize. Classic. Ancient Greece? Yeah. When you're in the theater, you're not just watching, you're part of the show and might even have thrown an olive branch or two, so congrats. You survived a long day of tragic plays. Now you wander into the agora, the bustling city center, and you bump into a dude in a robe, barefoot, asking strangers, "What is justice?" Welcome to philosophy. It's everywhere and not optional in ancient Greece, especially Athens. Philosophy was the local sport, and the champions were the names we still associate with world-changing ideas: Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, but back then they were just quirky guys who talked too much and made people feel dumb. Take Socrates, for example. This guy made a career out of asking pointless questions and destroying everyone's confidence in their own opinions. Maybe you're busy, minding your own business, buying olives or petting a wild goat, and bam, he's there. Do you believe in truth? Yeah, I guess so. What is truth? Cue 3 hours of deep existential dread and a sudden urge to move to Sparta. He never wrote anything down. His student Plato did that, but Socrates left a mark, partly because Athens eventually executed him for being a nuisance, officially, for corrupting the youth and not believing in the gods. But honestly, he probably just wouldn't stop questioning the dinner conversation. Philosophy wasn't its cozy academic hobby. It was loud, confrontational, and weirdly athletic. Debates happened in public spaces. They were spontaneous, intense, and usually ended with hurt feelings or a deep existential crisis. No mics, just voices, hands, and enough egos to fill the street. And if you think you could just stand there watching, think again. Philosophers loved dragging random passers-by into their mess. You didn't just walk past Plato's academy. You got sucked in. You said one slightly off thing, and suddenly you were the poster child for an unexamined life. Not even kids were safe. Aristotle was Alexander the Great's tutor. Yeah, the teen who later conquered half the known world. Imagine your high school civics teacher handing you a globe and saying, "Fix this." So philosophy gave us logic, ethics, science, and political theory. But in ancient Greece, it also gave you headaches, identity crises, and a 70% chance of public humiliation by a sandal-wearing dude. So you've arrived in ancient Athens. You're witty, smart, and politically active. Maybe too popular. That's your first mistake. Because in Athens, if you get too famous, you could be kicked out of the city for 10 years. No arrest, no fine, just bye-bye. Not a conspiracy. It's no secret deal, just exile. It's baked right into the system. They called it ostracism, and it was totally legal, totally public, and totally terrifying. Once a year, the Athenians would gather to decide if they wanted to hold an ostracism vote. If enough people said yes, everyone would write down the name of the person they wanted to exile on a broken piece of pottery called an ostracon. If someone got 6,000 votes or more, boom, they were out. No court, no explanations. Just slip on your sandals and hit the road. You didn't even have to be a criminal. Most folks exiled hadn't done anything wrong except become way too influential. Maybe you were a war hero, a slick talker, or just had great hair. Either way, your fellow Athenians decided you were a threat to democracy. So democracy voted to put you on pause. And here's the kicker. It wasn't forever. Ostracism lasted 10 years. Then you could just stroll back as if nothing happened. Your stuff stayed safe. Your citizenship stayed intact. No grudges, just an unwanted decade-long vacation. Some famous Athenians got the boot. Aristides the Just was so beloved that some people actually voted against him just because they were tired of hearing how virtuous he was. Brutal, even Themistocles, the military genius who saved Athens at Salamis, got ousted when he got too full of himself. Turns out, gratitude has an expiration date. Ostracism was meant to protect Athens from tyrants, but it often punished success instead. So if you had ambitions, you had to walk a tightrope. Be respected, but not too respected. Popular, but not so popular you freak everyone out. Think of it like a reality TV show where winning too many fans means you get shipped off to the countryside with just your pride and olive oil stash. Athens gave birth to democracy, but also invented cancel culture 2,500 years early in ancient Greece. You didn't ask if you'd die young. You just wondered if it would be soon and how painful. Average life expectancy hovered around 30 to 35 years, and that's only if you survived infancy, which was no small feat. About a third of kids didn't make it past childhood thanks to disease, poor nutrition, and hygiene that was more theory than practice. As we already mentioned, you could die from anything: an infected scratch, a mysterious fever, childbirth, which was the #1 killer of women, or just drinking the wrong cup of water. Medicine was basic, and divine intervention was about as reliable as a weather forecast. If you lived in a city, diseases spread fast. Cramped living, open sewers, and public fountains made epidemics part of daily life. The infamous plague during the Peloponnesian War wiped out a third of Athens. Thucydides wrote about it, then caught it himself, and somehow survived. Most people weren't that lucky. Constant war. If you were a man, you'd probably die with a spear in your hand or rowing a boat. Even if you survived battle, wounds usually killed you within days. No antibiotics, no stitches, just hope and some garlic rubs. And then there was always the risk of a god's wrath. Offend a deity. Forget heroism, mock a statue in a temple, or badmouth Zeus after 3 drinks, and you might find yourself on the receiving end of lightning, plague, or a stampede of runaway goats. Burial rites were a big deal. If your family couldn't afford a proper funeral with coins for the ferryman and rituals to secure your afterlife, you might get dumped outside the city walls with no trace and no memory, wielding spears or rowing boats. Even if you didn't die in battle, wounds often led to death a few days later. No antibiotics, no stitches, just hope and garlic compresses, and always the chance of dying from divine wrath. Piss off a god. Forget sacrifices, mock a statue in a temple, or badmouth Zeus after 3 cups of wine. You could find yourself on the receiving end of lightning, plague, or a stampede of rogue goats. Burial rites were serious business. If your family couldn't afford a decent funeral, with coins for the ferryman and rituals to ensure you rest in the afterlife, you might be left outside the city walls with no mark, forgotten and forsaken. Not just tragic, but spiritually dangerous. Greeks believed unburied souls wandered forever, stuck between worlds. Death wasn't poetic, it was daily, and it didn't care about philosophy, looks, or lineage. You could be a slave, a general, or a poet, and still die from a moldy fig or a vicious mosquito. The Greeks had 12 gods on Mount Olympus, and not a single one of them liked you. In theory, ancient Greek religion was about harmony with the divine, worshiping Zeus, Hades, Athena, Apollo. Artemis, Poseidon, and the rest of the Golden Gang on Olympus, but in reality, it was a constant mental damage control exercise. These gods weren't your friendly neighborhood deities. They were diva queens with superpowers. Forget about sacrifice. They'd wreck your crops, pray wrong, and your ship sinks. Wander into the wrong forest snake bite, plague, famine. Take your pick. These gods demanded not just loyalty, they wanted perfect timing, perfect rituals, and absolute obedience. You don't show up at church weekly. You have daily rituals, ancestor altars, seasonal festivals, and civic ceremonies before planting. Pray to the deities heading into battle. Send Ares off on a sea voyage. Better pour Poseidon some wine and maybe throw in a goat for good measure. Every god had their favorites and grudges. Apollo might protect your city unless your grandpa once offended him. Then, congrats. You're cursed until further notice. Hera's the goddess of marriage, but she also specializes in making mortal women's lives miserable if Zeus so much as looks at them sideways. Athena rewards wisdom and sometimes turns people into spiders. Just your average Tuesday, and if the Olympian gods aren't enough to freak you out, there are nymphs, satyrs, spirits, river gods, and monsters lurking everywhere. Step wrong on sacred ground, and suddenly your left foot belongs to a spiteful forest goblin. But the worst part, you never know why bad stuff happens. Was it a wrong offering? Bad timing? Did you offend a god in your dreams? Maybe it was your cousin or something your great-granddad did. Doesn't matter. The gods work in mysterious and super passive-aggressive ways. Still, despite all the nightmares, Greek religion seeped into every part of life, from politics to childbirth to the Olympic Games. Sure, you feared the gods, but you needed them too. Their temples were city landmarks, their festivals were national holidays, and their myths explained everything from lightning strikes to love. You didn't believe in the gods out of faith. You believed out of survival instinct. So after all, the sunny homes, barley breakfasts, blistered feet from sandals, wars, plagues, gods, and goat-related injuries. Let's ask the big question clearly. Could you survive a day in ancient Greece? Honestly, nope. You'd fold before lunch. The heat, the diet, the constant threat of war or divine punishment would wipe your toga selfie dreams right off your face. You're not used to carrying water before breakfast or squatting over a pit next to a goat in a temple. You'd miss running water, aspirin, and the right to complain without getting exiled by a shard of pottery. You might like the idea of living among marble statues, brilliant philosophers, and epic poets. But guess what? That was just 1% of ancient Greece's population. For the rest, it was hard labor, limited rights, and frequent funerals. Your democracy only applied if you were a male citizen. Your medicine, garlic, and hope. Your gods were constantly pissed off. Your social media, some dude yelling about justice in the agora while waving a fish, but despite all that, the Greeks endured. They built temples still standing today, wrote plays we still perform, debated ideas we're still wrestling with, and laid the foundation for everything from astronomy to ethics. They didn't just survive hardship, they built civilization dripping in sweat you wouldn't survive. But they did, not because life was easy, but because that's 1% of the ancient Greek population. For everyone else, hard labor, limited rights, and frequent funerals, your democracy, only if you're a male citizen, your medicine, garlic, so and hope, your gods always pissed off, your social media, some guy yelling about justice in the agora while waving a fish, but despite all that, the Greeks still endured. They built temples that still stand today, wrote plays we still perform, debated ideas we're still struggling with, and laid the groundwork for everything from astronomy to ethics. They didn't just survive hardships, they created civilization while sweating buckets. You probably wouldn't survive. But they did, not because life was easy, but because they figured out how to find meaning in a chaotic world. They questioned everything, kept fighting, and wrote brilliantly, died young, and somehow still shaped the modern world. So no, you probably won't survive your first heat stroke, goat bite, or street philosophy lesson. But if you do, if you adapt, endure, and actually listen, you'll find yourself standing among some of the most passionate, resilient, and wonderfully flawed people history has ever met. And guess what? They won't judge you for trying. They'll just hand you a cloak, point to Amphui, and say, "Good, now haul it up the hill." Everything kicks off with deaths and betrayal. Prasutagus, king of the Iceni tribe in what's now eastern England, was pretty good at playing the Roman game. He walked the tightrope for years, ruling as a client king under Rome's watchful eye. He got wealth, autonomy, and peace as long as he stayed useful to the empire. But when he died around 60 AD, he left a will meant to protect his people. He named the Roman emperor as an ally along with his 2 young daughters, hoping this loyalty stunt would guarantee their safety and sovereignty. Spoiler alert, he was dead wrong. Rome didn't care about that. Rome didn't negotiate. Rome just took over, without a second thought. The Roman authorities fully annexed the Iceni kingdom. Their soldiers stormed in and seized everything land, livestock, homes, treasures. But stealing property wasn't the worst crime. What they did next and turned a political insult into personal hell. They whipped Queen Boudica in public, not just to humiliate her, but to send a clear message. You're nothing. And just to add salt to the wound, they also assaulted her daughters right in front of her. This wasn't just oppression, it was psychological warfare, designed to break the human spirit. But did it break Boudica? Nope. It forged her. The Romans thought they'd crushed a tiny tribal woman under their boots. What they actually did was wake a lioness, a queen who would turn her pain into revenge, a mother with a fury that could soon burn down entire cities, a woman reminding Rome that even an empire bleeds. News of this brutality spread fast across Britain. Other tribes listened. They remembered their shame, lost lands, and sons who died in Roman campaigns. The Romans assumed the tribes were divided and scattered, but at that moment, they all shared one thing: Boudica's rage. What started as Rome violating a queen would soon end with the empire drowning in fear. They broke a treaty, shattered a family, and in doing so, shattered the illusion of Roman invincibility in Britannia. This wasn't just a mistake. It was the spark that lit one of the fiercest rebellions Rome ever faced. If Rome thought Boudica would stay quiet, they clearly misunderstood everything about her. Boudica wasn't born to obey. She was born to lead, described by Roman historians as tall, fierce, with fiery red hair flowing down to her waist and a voice booming over crowds like a war horn. She wasn't just a queen by blood, she was a symbol, and now a threat. But before she became that threat, she became something deeper, a mother with nothing left to lose. The Romans' cruelty tried to erase her dignity, her children's future, and her people's pride, but Boudica refused to be a victim. She knew what Rome feared most wasn't their army, but unity, and so she set out to forge it, tribe by tribe. First up, the Trinovantes, once powerful before Rome crushed them with taxes, land grabs, and slavery. When Boudica spoke, she didn't sound like a diplomat. She sounded like a battle-scarred warrior mom who refused to break. She reminded them of their ancestors, their gods, and the land they no longer owned. Her pain was their pain. Her rage was theirs too. Then other tribes started listening. Candlelight, Corioltauvi, Coronovi, even some Brigantes. Her mission wasn't revenge anymore. It became a Candlelight, Corioltauvi, Coronovi, even some Brigantes. Revenge wasn't her goal anymore. It became a sacred mission to cleanse Roman arrogance from Britannia. She didn't promise safety, only glory and an honorable death. If that happened, they'd follow her because she didn't stand behind her warriors. She rode among them, spear in hand, hair flying in the wind, eyes fixed on the future. Spear in hand, hair flying in the wind, eyes fixed on the future. She named the raped, the enslaved, the executed. She called on gods like Andraste, the Celtic war goddess, as witnesses, and the warriors believed her when she said the gods would fight alongside them. No fancy military training, no Roman war plans, but she had something deadlier, righteous fury, sharpened by betrayal, driven by purpose, and the land itself seemed to shift under her command. This wasn't a rebellion, it was a resurrection. The Queen Rome thought was down and out was now, the spearhead of a movement that would soon make the empire tremble, and she was just getting started. The Roman eagle had long soared over Britannia, but now, the wind beneath its wings had changed. Boudica's rage wasn't a forest fire. It was a brewing storm with a terrifying purpose, and storms need fuel. That fuel came from thousands of Brits who'd waited years, even generations, for someone to challenge the empire, someone who didn't speak Latin, but spoke in blood and steel. She gave them that voice. It all started with war councils held under sacred woods and moonlit hills. Boudica didn't sit on a throne. She stood with the people. She listened to the elders' anger, the mother's sorrow, and the druids' chants, reading omens in the sky. They all spoke one truth: Rome had gone too far. Now it was time to fight back. Warriors from the Trinovantes came armed with spears, slingshots, and ancient battle hymns. Aine brought cavalry, fast riders with wild hair and fierce, war-painted faces that knew no fear. Other tribes joined with axes, swords, and torches. Even women grabbed weapons, inspired by their queen. This wasn't just army building. It was a Celtic identity revival, but Rome had trained professional legions, disciplined, armed, and deadly. Boudica had to make up for that, with sheer numbers, local knowledge, and something Rome could never teach: hatreds forged in humiliation. Soon, Boudica's army swelled to tens of thousands. Farmers turned fighters, hunters turned killers, former Roman slaves, and mistreated tribal allies switched sides. They fought not for money, but for memory, revenge, and the right to raise their kids unchained. She gave her first of many speeches. Roman historians later recorded her words, biased as always, but the echo through time was clear. She swore to win or die. No surrender, no submission, no turning back. Then came the first target, Camulodunum, once a Brit fort, now a Roman colony full of temples, statues, and villas. The Claudian temple stood as an insult, a shrine to the emperor who conquered them, to Boudica and her warriors. This place wasn't sacred. It was a provocation, and the first to fall. The tribes no longer whispered rebellion. They marched, furious and led by a queen who refused to kneel. Camulodunum never stood a chance. The once proud Roman colony turned into a symbol of everything Boudica's people despised. Its streets echoed not tribal songs, but Latin slogans. Its buildings rose on sacred ground, dominated by the marble temple of Claudius, built by forced labor to honor the emperor, who had crushed the Britons. To Rome, a monument. To Boudica, a target. She gave the order. What followed wasn't a siege. It was an execution. Her army swept in like a tsunami. Roman settlers, many, veterans who'd bullied and taxed local tribes, were caught off guard. The city had no real walls. Among them were veterans who bullied and taxed local tribes. Caught totally off guard, the city had no proper walls. A handful of Roman soldiers stationed there weren't prepared. Expecting peace, not war, they tried to hold the temple, barricading themselves inside, believing the temple could withstand a siege. Spoiler, it couldn't. Within 2 days, Boudica's forces tore through the city. Streets ran red. No one was spared. Men, women, and children were slaughtered. Boudica's war wasn't just military, it was personal. Her warriors destroyed Roman statues, burned villas to the ground, and unleashed fury on the symbols of occupation. The temple burned down. Its roof collapsed in a firestorm that darkened the sky for miles. Survivors were rare, and the escapees carried horror stories that made Romans shudder. This rage wasn't random. It was deliberate. These were people who'd seen their homes stolen, their gods mocked, their daughters sold off. Now they were taking back what was stolen with interest. Roman officials sent desperate pleas to Governor Suetonius, hundreds of miles away in Wales, to crush another rebellion, but by the time they heard Camulodunum had fallen, the place was ashes, a destroyed colony, its people dead, and the flames of revolt rising higher. Boudica didn't stick around to celebrate. No time for that. She knew Rome would strike back, and hard, so she pressed on, knowing each victory fueled her fire. Her next stop was a bigger, richer, and even more vulnerable city, London. If Rome hadn't taken her seriously before, they sure would now. Camulodunum was just the opening act, but revenge wasn't done until the heart of Britannia felt the burn. Londinium was the jewel of Roman Britannia, founded just 17 years earlier. The city had blossomed into a bustling trade and administrative hub. Merchants from all over the empire flooded its markets. Officials did royal business under tiled roofs. Wealth flowed through its streets like water, but as Boudica's army drew closer, that wealth turned to panic. Governor Suetonius, rushing back from Wales with a small force, arrived just before the rebellion. He looked over at Londinium, crowded, chaotic, totally defenseless, and made a brutal call. He ditched it. The Roman legions stationed elsewhere were just too far to help. Suetonius couldn't risk his limited troops in a city that couldn't be defended, so he bailed, taking whoever could run away with him. He left behind the old, the sick, the stubborn, and those too slow to believe a women-led army could take down Rome. They'd learn the hard way. Boudicca's army stormed into Londinium like lightning. No walls to scale, no gates to break down. The city was wide open, and she bled it dry. Her warriors tore through the streets with the fury of generations. They didn't loot. They didn't occupy. They exterminated. The killing was methodical. Romans were dragged from their homes. Entire families wiped out. Some stabbed through. Others burned alive in temples. No mercy. No Roman symbols spared. Villas torched. Warehouses ablaze. Smoke billowed for miles, curling black against the English sky. This wasn't just a massacre. It was a statement. The message, Rome wasn't invincible. Roman historians like Tacitus and Cassius Dio estimated tens of thousands died. Some say the brutality even outdid what happened at Camulodunum. To Rome, this wasn't just a revolt. It was Armageddon, and Boudica surpassed them all. She didn't hide behind commanders. She led from her chariot. Her daughters flanked her. She witnessed the pride of an empire crumble beneath her wheels. This wasn't mindless violence. To her, it was justice for what Rome did to her family, her people, her land. And she wasn't done yet. There was another Roman hub ahead, Verulamium, and beyond that, Rome's full-on retaliation. Rome had faced rebellions before. They'd fought wars across continents, but never anything like Boudica. She wasn't a trained general. She didn't speak Latin, didn't wear shiny armor, yet she burned 2 Roman cities to ash and slaughtered thousands of civilians and soldiers alike. And now, as Verulamium, a prosperous Roman town northwest of Londinium, went up in flames, the empire started to panic. News of her rebellion reached the Roman Senate. Rumor has it, Emperor Nero even considered pulling out of Britannia entirely. Imagine that an empire stretching from African deserts to the Gerania Mountains, thinking of retreating because of one woman, a chariot, and a cause. She scared them that much. Actually, Boudica's power wasn't just her army, it was what she stood for. Rome saw itself as untouchable, its cities eternal, its rule inevitable. But here's a Celtic queen, once beaten and humiliated, now leading a rebellion that turned Roman settlements to dust. Every city she burned wasn't just a tactical win, it was a psychological shock. Verulamium shared the same fate as Camulodunum and Londinium, rich, Romanized, and totally undefended. Boudica's warriors slaughtered the people, destroyed temples, and leveled Roman infrastructure. Archaeological evidence today still shows a thick layer of ash beneath the modern town, a fire so fierce it left scars in the ground. But here's the irony. With every victory, Boudica's war machine grew stronger. Her army swelled, but supplies ran thin. Organization faltered, drunk on success. Some tribes got careless, and Rome's famous for bouncing back, regrouped. Governor Suetonius wasn't twiddling his thumbs. Sure, he retreated, but he didn't surrender. He started gathering reinforcements, pulling battle-hardened legions from across the province. He scoped out high ground, studied the terrain, and prepped for a showdown. But even as the Roman army rebuilt, every soldier carried a nagging fear. Could they really stop her? Because Boudica wasn't just launching a war. She was rewriting the conquest story, and she proved city by city that Rome could bleed and queens could fight back. The final showdown arrived, and the empire held its breath. The fire had spread as far as it could. Now, the storm had to face steel. Governor Gaius Suetonius Paulinus picked his battlefield like a pro. He wasn't your average Roman officer. This guy was a survivor. While Boudica's warriors celebrated victories, Suetonius was busy crunching numbers. He picked a narrow alleyway, a tight squeeze surrounded by woods and hills where Boudica's legions of numbers didn't mean squat. His army was small, about 10,000 strong, but every single one was a well-trained killing machine, drilled in legion discipline. Meanwhile, Boudica's forces were massive. Some say as many as 200,000 warriors marched under her flag. But they weren't soldiers. They were farmers, blacksmiths, tribal chiefs, and freedom seekers fired up. Sure, but totally undisciplined, furious but utterly unprepared. They thought sheer numbers would crush Rome like a tidal wave. Spoiler, they were wrong. As Boudica's army advanced, she gave one last speech, standing on her war chariot, flanked by her daughters. She reminded them of the lashings, the rapes, the land plundered, the homes burnt to ash. She called on the goddess Andraste, begged her ancestors, and swore to either win or die trying. Her warriors roared back. They believed the gods would lead them. Then the battle kicked off. The Britons attacked. They flooded the battlefield with raw fury, but Suetonius stood firm. He let them crowd in, jammed tight in that narrow terrain. Then, right on cue, he unleashed the Roman counterattack. Spears flew in tight formations, shields locked like a wall. Roman short swords sliced deep into the chaos. Wave after wave of British warriors slammed into the iron wall and shattered every time. Then the Romans advanced step by step, disciplined, precise, and merciless. Behind the Britons, wagons and families had followed the army, expecting to watch Rome's defeat. Instead, they became a deadly bottleneck. The warriors couldn't retreat. Panic set in. The narrow battlefield turned into a slaughterhouse. When the dust settled, it was over. Tens of thousands of Britons lay dead. The rebellion was crushed. The empire bent, but didn't break. Boudica threw everything at Rome, and though she lost the battle, her memory echoed louder than clashing swords. Her final fate remains a mystery, but her legend became immortal. The battlefield was silent, war's roar replaced by the groans of the dying. Boudica didn't just lose a battle, she lost the war she started, the ground soaked with her people's blood, their shattered dreams drifting into England's cold air. And Boudica, she vanished. No eyewitness account of her last breath, no clear details on her death. Roman historians tell conflicting tales. Some say she drank poison, choosing death over capture. Others say she fell ill and quietly died later. But what they agree on is this: she disappeared. No chained queen paraded through Rome's streets, no public execution, no final humiliation. She just vanished like a storm that burned itself out. But in that vanishing act, something extraordinary happened. She became more than a queen. She became a legend. Rome, shaken and shamed by the scale of the uprising, tried to bury the memory, but it was too late. Boudica's name whispered through tribal songs and echoed in sacred woods. To England, she wasn't a defeated rebel, she was a martyr, a goddess of war and revenge, a mother who stood up to the world's mightiest empire and made it. Rebellions tried to bury that memory, but it was too late. Boudica's name was whispered in tribal songs and echoed through sacred woods. To England, she wasn't a defeated rebel, she was a martyr, a war goddess and avenger, a mom who stood up to the mightiest empire and made it bleed. Even the Romans grudgingly respected her. Tacitus, a true Roman, didn't call her a savage, but a fierce leader wronged by imperial arrogance. Cassius Dio wrote about her commanding presence and terrifying speeches. They feared her, sure, but also admired her grit. And through centuries, Boudica refused to die. She popped up again in Victorian statues, Tennyson's poems, history books, and beyond, and school lessons. She became the ultimate symbol of defiance, especially for women who saw her story as an unstoppable fire. Her chariot, with wheels sharp enough to tear through time itself, became a vehicle of resistance. So, even if her body got lost to history, her voice never faded. It rides the wind, it screams in flames. This line echoes in the soul of anyone who ever stood up to oppression and whispered, "I will not kneel." Centuries have passed since Boudica vanished into the fog of history, but her shadow still lingers all over the British Isles. You'll find her name carved on monuments, hear her mentioned in political speeches, and feel her spirit alive in the stubborn soul of a land that never really forgot her. In London, near Westminster Bridge, a bronze statue shows her standing on a war chariot, flanked by her daughters, eyes fixed on the horizon, wheels raised defiantly below her. The traffic noise and wandering tourists don't realize they're walking in the echo of her rebellion. But her legacy isn't just statues. The real deal is what she stood for. Boudica grew into something way bigger than all her battles combined. She became the eternal question for every empire, every oppressor, every ruler who forgot the power of the people. What happens when the uprising is silent? She wasn't perfect. Her rebellion was bloody and brutal. Tens of thousands died at the hands of her warriors. But history isn't written by saints. It's made by those who dare resist. And resistance is rarely clean. Still, what made Boudica endure wasn't just fighting Rome. It was the fire she sparked in people's imaginations. A woman who lost everything but stood tall. A queen who refused to be defined by the empire that tried to break her. A mother who turned her pain into a sword. Modern historians still argue over her exact role, choices, and motives, but ask any Brit who Boudica is, and they won't read footnotes. They'll tell you she's the queen who made Rome bleed, the woman who united warring tribes, the warrior who taught the world that dignity can rise even from destruction. And in that, she became more than a historical figure. She became a symbol of rebellion, courage, and an unshakable will for freedom. Because even when Rome rebuilt cities and redrew maps, they couldn't erase her. Her fire still burns. In every fight against tyranny, in every voice that dares say no, and in every soul who'd rather die standing than live on their knees. Boudica is gone, but her legend lives forever. Back then, sickness was never random. It wasn't just about bacteria, viruses, or rogue cells. Those ideas took thousands of years to show up. In the ancient world, illness wasn't just a sign of a weak body, but a sign of deeper disorder. Imbalance. Crack in the harmony between body, mind, soul, and nature. In Mesopotamia, sickness was often seen as divine punishment. If you got sick, people believed you'd offended the gods, broken a taboo, or caught a curse. Diagnosis didn't start with symptoms, but with questions. What did you do? Who did you anger? Priests and healers worked together, interpreting omens, chanting spells, and prescribing rituals along with herbal remedies. In ancient China, balance was a bigger system with yin, yang, and the 5 elements. Health meant staying balanced between opposing forces. Too hot or too cold, too dry or too damp could throw your body off track. Practitioners of traditional Chinese medicine didn't just treat coughs. They asked when the pain started, what time of day it got worse, and what emotions came with it. Healing was a full package. Herbs, acupuncture, and diet changes were all tools to help, rebalancing the inner universe. Back in Greece, Dr. Hippocrates threw out the idea that gods punish people with sickness, but he still saw health as harmony. His theory of the 4 bodily humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, ruled Western medicine for centuries. Each humor linked to a temperament and an element. Too much or too little of either could mess with your body and personality. For example, a gloomy soul was thought to have an overdose of black bile. Across all cultures, one thing stayed: constant health means wholeness, not just not hurting, but balance. Whether it's the dosha idea in India's Vedas or spiritual possession beliefs in African healing traditions. Ancient folks got one thing right. Humans aren't lone wolves. We're part of nature, and nature fights back when disturbed. So, when old-time healers laid hands on the sick, they weren't just checking for bruises. They were tuning into imbalance, and they believed healing meant handling invisible forces as carefully as they'd treat physical wounds. In the land of pyramids and pharaohs, medicine was both science and magic. Ancient Egyptian healers, called S3X, weren't your average doctors. They were sacred middlemen between body and gods. Their medical methods were super advanced, yet deeply wrapped in ritual and magic. For Egyptians, bodies could bleed, bruise, and break. But sickness, never just physical. The soul, gods, and even the afterlife played a role in every illness. Most of what we know comes from medical texts like the Ebers Papyrus. Dating back to around 550 BC, this ancient scroll holds hundreds of remedies for everything from toothaches to tumors. Egyptian docs performed surgery, bone setting, infection treatment, and abscess draining with sterilized copper tools. They could check pulses, observe urine and stool for diagnosis, and used tons of herbs, many still popular today. But no treatment started without the gods' blessing. People believed Thoth gifted humans the secrets of healing. Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of war and plagues, was both feared and prayed to. She could unleash disease or bring recovery. Chants were often recited for patients, while herbal remedies were applied. Words had power. These chants weren't just empty phrases. They were medicine in sound form. One of their best tools, honey, used as an antiseptic long before germs were a thing. Wounds were bandaged. With it, sometimes mixed with pine resin or fabric fibers, garlic and onions were prescribed for heart health. Castor oil worked as a laxative. Even moldy bread got pressed onto infected wounds, a crude antibiotic centuries ahead of its time. Egyptian doctors treated common folks and royalty alike. Their skills were respected worldwide. Neighboring civilizations sent their toughest cases to Egyptian healers. In a way, they were the OG specialists. Some focused on stomachs, others on eyes, or even mental suffering, but through it all, they never separated the physical from the divine. A fever could come from a Nile mosquito or an angry ghost. Healing meant pleasing the gods, cleansing the soul, and restoring sacred balance for ancient Egyptians. The healer's true job wasn't just curing illness, it was about restoring cosmic order. Long before modern medicine showed up, India had already written its own healing story, a view of the human body not as a machine, but as a mirror of the universe. This ancient system is called Ayurveda, a Sanskrit word meaning the science of life, rooted in Vedic tradition. Centuries ahead of her time, Egyptian doctors didn't just treat common folks, they took care of royalty too. Their skills were respected worldwide. Neighboring civilizations would send their toughest cases to Egyptian docs. Somehow, they were the OG specialists. Some focused on stomachs, others on eyes, or even mental suffering, but in all their wisdom, they didn't separate the physical from the sacred. A fever might come from a Nile mosquito or an angry ghost. Healing the body meant pleasing the gods, cleansing the soul, and restoring divine balance. For ancient Egyptians, a healer's real job wasn't just curing illness. It was about restoring cosmic order. Long before modern medicine showed up, India wrote its own healing story, a view of the body not as a machine, but as a mirror of the universe. This ancient system is called Ayurveda, a Sanskrit word meaning the science of life, rooted in Vedic tradition. Ayurveda isn't just medicine, it's a philosophy, a lifestyle in harmony with nature, seasons, and spirit. The core of Ayurveda is the concept of three doshas, Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. Each represents a unique combo of the five elements: earth, water, fire, air, and space. Vata rules movement. Pitta controls metabolism like digestion, and Kapha manages structure and stability. Everyone's born with a unique balance of these doshas. Illness pops up when that balance breaks down, thanks to bad diet, stress, environment, or lifestyle. Ayurveda texts like Karaka Samhita and Sushruta Samhita are over 2,000 years old. These detailed manuals don't just offer herbal remedies, but also cover surgery, obstetrics, psychology, and even ethics. For physicians, Karaka focuses on internal medicine, pushing prevention as the first line of defense. Meanwhile, Sushruta is remembered as a surgery pioneer, describing over 300 surgical procedures and more than 120 surgical tools, many carved from wood or metal. One of his most mind-blowing techniques was nose surgery, rebuilding the nose using skin flaps from the patient's cheek or forehead. This wasn't about vanity. It was often to restore faces disfigured by punishment from thousands of years before Western medicine evolved. Sushruta was ready for that. But Ayurveda's power lies in its holistic approach. Healing the body can't be separated from healing the mind and soul. Treatments include herbal medicine, yoga, breathing exercises called pranayama, oil massages known as abhyanga, and meditative fasting. Plants like turmeric, ashwagandha, neem, and tulsi weren't just food, they were medicine, cleansers, and protectors. Vitality. An old school herbal doc could cure a fever, not just with plants, but by tweaking your sleep schedule, checking your emotional health, and detoxing your gut. Ayurveda says you're not separate from nature. You are nature, and when you get sick, nature basically sends you a time to balance up memo. In ancient China, health wasn't just about flesh and bones, it was all about energy. This invisible life force called qi, pronounced chi, flows through every living thing. The secret to staying healthy, keeping qi flowing freely, no blockages or overloads. That simple idea laid the foundation for one of the oldest continuous medical systems on earth, traditional Chinese medicine, aka TCM. To get sickness, ancient Chinese docs first had to understand what it really was. They watched the seasons, moon phases, animal behavior, and cosmic movements. Out of these patterns came two core principles, yin and yang, and 5 elements: wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. Yin and yang symbolize balance in everything. Yin is cold, dark, passive, and introverted. Yang is hot, sharp, active, and extroverted. Every organ, emotion, and body function fits into this push-pull dynamic. Health. It's all about keeping that balance in motion. A fever isn't just a high temp, it's an overload of yang. Feeling drained could be your yin running low. Diagnosis was an art. Docs didn't lean on gadgets. They used their senses, tongue checks, pulse at multiple spots, voice tone, plus questions about dreams, emotions, and digestion. Every little detail gave clues about the chi balance, or lack thereof, to get you back on track. They pulled out a massive toolbox, acupuncture sticking needles at precise points along the body's meridians to clear chi blockages, moxibustion burning mugwort near those points to warm and boost blood flow, cupping, herbal remedies, qigong exercises, and strict diets all played their part. The ancient text hanging on the wall, the Huangdi Neijing, written about 2,000 years ago, still forms the backbone of TCM today. It's not just a catalog of diseases. This work digs into causes, prevention, and lifestyle. It teaches that emotions like anger, grief, and fear can throw your organs out of whack. And healing means balancing feelings as well as fixing the body. Chinese medicine never separates humans from their world. To fix the body, you must treat the climate, soul, and invisible energy inside. The ancients believed every heartbeat was qi speaking, and the healer's job was to listen. In ancient Greek temples and Roman forums, medicine started moving away from the divine and into reason. But even there, the body was seen as a fragile ecosystem tuned by balance and temperament. At the core of this worldview was a theory shaping Western medicine for over 1,000 years. The 4 bodily humors, developed by Greek doc Hippocrates and later expanded by Roman physicians like Galen, This theory claimed the human body is governed by four fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, each humor linked to an element: air, water, fire, earth, plus a specific temperament. A healthy person had these fluids in balance and stayed disease-free. Illness was just too much or too little of one. Got a fever, an angry outburst, too much yellow bile, aka a temper tantrum in fluid form. Feeling sluggish and pale, probably drowning in cold, damp phlegm. Treatments focused on restoring balance with bloodletting, purging, special diets, and baths. But the Greeks didn't stop at fluids. They believed healing came from keen observation and environment too. The Hippocratic Oath still echoes today, telling docs not to harm, to watch patients carefully, and treat the whole person, not just the illness. Hippocrates told his students to consider the seasons, winds, water quality, and even the patient's mood. Healing sanctuaries, named after the god Asclepius, were scattered all over. Greek homes weren't just places to crash, they doubled as hospitals, more like chill-out zones. Patients slept in sacred bedrooms, hoping for healing dreams. Purification rituals, exercise, diet, and prayer were all part of the healing gig. It was where reason and religion walked hand in hand. Meanwhile, in Rome, medicine leveled up with Galen, the Greek doc to gladiators and emperors. He dissected animals to figure out anatomy, wrote hundreds of medical texts, and basically standardized medicine across the empire. Sure, some of his ideas were off, but Galen's influence stuck around for centuries. Greek medicine, with all its mystical origins, started leaning toward a new idea. The human body is a complex system, yes, but understandable, and if you get it right, you can fix it. Not just by praying to gods, but through reason, rituals, and careful healing arts. Long before written texts or formal med schools, indigenous people worldwide healed their communities with deeper knowledge passed down through stories, images, and real-world nature experience. For these cultures, medicine wasn't a job. It was a lifestyle woven into daily rituals, seasonal rhythms, and sacred ceremonies. Native American tribes called their healers medicine people, but their role was way bigger than just treating physical ailments. They were spiritual guides, storytellers, mentors, and keepers of ancestral wisdom. Illness was seen as a break in the relationship between humans and nature, tribe, spirits, or themselves. Healing took more than herbs, it required reconnecting. Trees were central to this sacred work. From the Cherokee to the Lakota, each tribe had encyclopedic knowledge of the land, which roots to chew for pain, which leaves to brew for fever, which bark to crush for wounds. Sage, cedar, sweetgrass, and tobacco were sacred plants used in smudging rituals to cleanse body and spirit. But medicine was never just about ingredients. It involved intention, ritual, and respect. Healers often worked with spiritual forces. They ran sweat lodges, vision quests, and drum circles. Sickness could come from breaking taboos, spiritual possession, or even soul loss, when part of a person's essence ran off due to trauma. In those cases, soul retrieval rituals were done calling the soul back with chanting, dancing, or guided trance. Deep reverence for nature also showed up in indigenous traditions everywhere. In the Amazon rainforest, shamans rely on powerful plant medicines like ayahuasca, a psychedelic not for partying, but for healing. They believe these plants are the real teachers. pointing out the roots of suffering through visions. Australian Aboriginal medicine includes herbs, clays, and rituals passed down since the dawn of time, when ancestors still shaped identity. Healing there means balancing body, land, ancestors, and song lines. These systems were never written down. They live in songs, dances, and the landscapes themselves. For indigenous healers, modern medicine may have fancy machines and labs, but Earth is always the first pharmacy. And healing isn't about beating disease, it's about remembering who we are. In every ancient civilization, regardless of language, geography, or beliefs, there's one constant healing needs more than herbs and surgery. It requires spirit. Whether illness was divine punishment, soul imbalance, or a sacred offense, ancient folks believed real healing started in the unseen world, and the gateway to that world was ritual in Mesopotamia. Long before official medicine, people turned to exorcists and priests to fight sickness. They believed illness was caused by evil spirits or offended gods. Clay tablets, revealing the nitty-gritty of healing rites, where folks whispered spells while doing their doctor thing. Special little statues were buried right under the house to scare away sickness. The ritual wasn't just part of treatment, it was the treatment. Ancient Egypt. No doctor dared work without begging the gods first. Before slathering honey on wounds or bandaging limbs, healers would pray to Thoth, the god of wisdom, or Sekhmet, goddess of healing and rage. Illness wasn't just a physical attack, it was cosmic chaos. Healing meant restoring the patient to Ma at the principle of truth, order, and harmony. In many African traditions, healers called Gangas or Sangomas used drums, dancing, and fortune-telling to diagnose and cure. They chatted with ancestors, summoned spirits, and often entered supernatural states to journey to the spirit world on behalf of patients. Herbs were crucial, but the invisible world always got top billing. Even in ancient Greece, rituals played a starring role at the sacred healing temples of Asclepius. Patients went through purification rites, fasting, and prayers at night. They'd snooze in blissful dreams under a statue of Asclepius, the healing god. Those dreams were interpreted by temple priests to guide treatment. Rituals weren't superstitions, they were the framework. They gave shape to suffering, a language for pain, and a feeling that the illness meant something. Through symbolic actions, people turned fear into hope, isolation into connection, and chaos into control. And beyond that, it reminded them they weren't alone. Even today, science studies the placebo effect, the power of belief, and the healing impact of intention. Ancient people didn't need data, they just got it. Sometimes a word spoken with reverence heals deeper wounds than any sword, because not every wound is visible, and not every medicine is made of stuff. When we think of ancient surgery, we imagine crude tools, shaky hands, and unbearable pain. But the truth is way more impressive and humane. Across the ancient world, surgery was performed with surprising precision. These early healers had no anesthesia, x-rays, or antiseptics, but they had skill, guts, and an astonishing understanding of the human body gained through generations of observation, trial, and sometimes brutal necessity. In India, the Sushruta Samhita, written over 2,000 years ago, detailed more than 300 surgical procedures. Its author, Sushruta, is considered the father of surgery. He described tumor removal, bone setting, hernia repair, and even nose reconstruction, a form of plastic surgery. His tools were sharp, varied, and carefully classified forceps, scalpels, probes, and needles, many made of iron or stone. Sushruta emphasized hygiene, surgical preparation, and the importance of understanding anatomy through dissection, although mostly limited to animals. His surgical wisdom spread beyond India, influencing Islamic and Western practices centuries later. In ancient Egypt, surgical knowledge mixed with ritual, papyrus texts reveal procedures for stitching wounds, treating dislocated limbs, and draining abscesses. Tools like bronze knives, bone scrapers, and cautery sticks were found in tombs. They even practiced trepanation, cutting holes in skulls to relieve pressure or treat head injuries. Surprisingly, many skulls show signs of healing, meaning patients survived. Treatment wasn't limited to Egypt. In pre-Columbian Peru, archaeologists found hundreds of drilled skulls, often from warriors wounded in battle. Some surgeries were shockingly successful. In certain regions, over 80% of patients survived bone reconstruction. These early surgeons might have used coca leaves or fermented beer to dull pain along with herbal antiseptics. In the Greco-Roman world, Galen developed surgical techniques by studying wounded gladiators and dissecting animals. His deep insights into the nervous system and blood vessel pathways laid the groundwork for anatomy as we know it. Roman army surgeons handled battlefield wounds, like pros, using clamps and tourniquets to stop the bleeding. Surgery was risky but still got mad respect. That was the turf of the brave few willing to slice into life itself. Hoping to trade pain for health, they weren't butchers. They were sword artists, and even though their knowledge was sketchy, their legacy lives on every time a scalpel goes up not to harm, but to heal. Today, we're swimming in a sea of digital diagnostics, robot surgeries, and gene mapping. We can scan your body in seconds and ship prescriptions across oceans with a tap. But in the quiet corners of modern medicine, whispers from the ancient world still echo. You'll find Ayurveda in yoga studios, Chinese herbal remedies in pharmacies, and native smudging rituals performed in hospitals honoring patient traditions. Med students still recite a version of the Hippocratic Oath, swearing not to harm, just like their Greek-Roman predecessors did in the OR. We use precision tools descended from Sushruta's iron instruments, concepts like holistic care, preventive medicine, and mind-body connection, the backbone of integrative health, come from ancient wisdom that saw healing not as a task, but a relationship. Even modern science loops back around. Studies increasingly confirm what the ancients believed. Stress, isolation, and emotional trauma can cripple your immune system, mess with sleep, and cause real physical pain. Meditation, once just a spiritual drill, is now studied for brain health. Forest bathing, born from Shinto and indigenous customs, is prescribed for anxiety, and the placebo effect, healing by belief, keeps baffling researchers who once scoffed at it. It's easy to dismiss traditional medicine as outdated, superstitious folklore, or crude guesswork, but look closer and you'll find something profound, a worldview that sees illness not just as broken machinery, but as a disruption in life, a signal that something is off somewhere. And that idea still matters, because medicine isn't just about fixing, it's about meaning comfort, being seen and understood. The ancients just knew this instinctively, whether they used chants, needles, leaves, or scalpels. They got that healing was sacred. Today, as we push deeper into biotech, AI, and personalized medicine, maybe we're not leaving the ancient world behind. Maybe we're circling back with new tools, but still driven by the human heart. A heart still craving balance, wholeness, and healing not just for the body, but for the soul. Her name drifts through history like a faint melody. Sappho, a poetess from the island of Lesbos, born around 630 BC, whose voice once stirred hearts under starry skies, and whose poetry, even in fragments, still echoes longing. Unlike ancient Greece's warriors and kings, her fame didn't come from conquest, but from feelings. Her battlefield, the human soul, she wrote about love and jealousy, beauty and despair, joy and craving. She caught fleeting moments a glance, a blush, a shiver, and pressed them into poems like fragile, eternal flowers. We know almost nothing about her life, no portraits, no diaries. What survives are traces, a few lines preserved by ancient scholars, quotes in other works, and scraps of lost papyrus scrolls, but those fragments still shine. Greek philosopher Plato called her the 10th muse. Centuries later, poets, translators, and dreamers tried to piece her life together like an unfinished song. Sappho was probably born into a noble family on Lesbos, northeastern Aegean island, a place of music and learning, where poetry was woven into social life. She may have had siblings, a daughter, it's even political enemies. Though the records are fuzzy, she lived through exile and turmoil, quiet moments and singing ones. Her world was one where most women's voices were either trapped at home or silenced altogether. Yet Sappho insisted on speaking out, not through rebellion, but through beauty. She wrote in the Iolic dialect, with short, vivid verses meant to be sung to lyres. Her style was intimate and rich in imagery, the morning star, bearer of all that daylight scattered. Words like these outlast empires, and then, as quietly as she appeared in records, she vanished. Most of her work was lost, burned, buried, or tossed out. But what remains proves one thing: she didn't need statues. Her poems are her monuments. And today, when we talk about passion in poetry, about unabashed love, about desire that spans centuries, we still whisper the name Sappho. To get her, you first have to get Lesbos, the island that nurtured her voice. Lesbos wasn't some backwater in the ancient Greek world. It was a dazzling hub of art, music, and philosophy, with fertile valleys, olive groves, and sea breezes smelling of salt and flowers. Lesbos was both a physical paradise and a cultural gem, not Athens. It didn't have to be. The song had its own rhythm, slower, sexier, soaked in lyrical tradition. Here, music wasn't just decoration, it was devotion. The lyre's voice and the cries echoed through houses and temples. Poetry was sung, not read, and in this world of sound and nature, Sappho's voice was born. She lived in the bustling city of Mytilene, The island's center. Politics thrived here, and so did art. The island boasted poets and philosophers, rival factions, and shifting alliances. Sappho herself was exiled, maybe to Sicily, amid political chaos, but Lesbos was always her homecoming. Her muse, Lesbos, was also a rare women's community in the ancient world. Noble girls were educated in music, poetry, and rituals. Some scholars think Sappho led a kind of theasos, a group or school where young women learned arts, poetry, dance, and worshipped Aphrodite. Not formal schooling as we know it, but a sacred sisterhood of creativity. Here, emotional, intellectual, and maybe romantic bonds were forged. Sappho wrote directly to these women not as abstract muses, but as real people in her life. She named them, mourned their departures, praised their beauty, and confessed her love sincerely. In one passage, she wrote, "I haven't heard a single word from her. I beg you, please bring her back to me." These aren't just myths or stage lines. They come from a living, breathing world, a bunch of women singing under the spotlight, weaving feelings into song. And even though later times twisted her legacy, boxing it into scandals or gossip, Lesbos was the real soil where her truth grew. Not just a dot on the map, but the cultural cradle of passion, art, and female expression. Sappho didn't just live on Lesbos. She became Lesbos, its breath, its heart, its voice. Back when Homer's epics were busy singing gods, heroes, and endless battles, Sappho wrote about the heart, not war. She sang about a trembling hand, a shy glance, a voice that made her skin crawl. She's one of the first Western poets to write in the first person, not just telling stories, but feeling them. And what she felt was love, desire, jealousy, tenderness, and craving. The craziest part she wrote as a woman, for women, about women, in ancient Greece. Women's voices were usually locked up tight at home or silenced completely. Public life, literature, politics, philosophy, totally a guy zone. But Sappho stepped out of those walls, not with a riot, but with rhythm. Her poetry didn't ask for much space. It carved its own universe, a private place where feelings weren't a weakness, but a power. And in that space, she did something revolutionary. She named the women she loved. She didn't reduce them to symbols. She didn't just talk in metaphors. She remembered their laughter, their perfume, how they braided their hair in one passage. She describes what it feels like to see the one you love. He's on par with the gods. The man sits beside me, listening to my sweet voice and admiring my lovely laughter. Oh, my heart races so fast. Here, Sappho is the outsider, watching the woman she loves talk to someone else. Her jealousy is quiet, painful, and so human. In just a few lines, she captures the full weight of unreturned love, something anyone, then or now, can totally relate to. Her words are seductive, but never crude. She writes about sensuality with the care of a painter neck curves, the softness of sleep, moonlight on skin. She never separates beauty from intimacy. They're the same thing because of this. Centuries later, she often got misunderstood or censored. Some tried to erase her queerness. Others mythologized her pain into tragedy. But none of that dulls the raw honesty in her voice. A woman writing sincerely, lyrically, and bravely about love, not just in theory, but like someone who's lived it deeply, openly, and without regrets. Sappho didn't just write poems. She composed music for the soul. Her poetry was never meant to be read silently. In ancient Greece, poetry was sound, or breath, vibration. Sappho's form was song short, intimate, performed with a small stringed instrument on her lap, gently plucked while her voice carried the lyrics like a breeze over the sea. This is the heart of lyric poetry. And yes, the word lyrical comes from this. Her poems aren't epic tales, no long stories about wars and gods. They're intimate, emotional, close up. Songs like whispers, confessions, love letters sung under fig trees or in candlelit rooms. And Sappho was the undisputed master of it. Her poems were written in Aeolic Greek, a soft, rhythmic local dialect. Her favorite meter, now called the Sapphic stanza, flows with a distinct rhythm. 3 longer lines followed by 1 shorter but punchy line like a sigh after a longing thought. It's delicate and melodic, like breath rising and falling in the quiet moment between lovers. The lyrical lyrics come from here too. Poetry wasn't epic. It didn't tell long tales of war and gods. It was intimate, emotional, and close. Lyrics like whispered secrets, confessions, love letters sung under a fig tree or in a candlelit room. And Sappho was the undisputed master. Her poems were written in Aeolic Greek, a local dialect rich in softness and rhythm. Her favorite meter, now called the Sapphic stanza, flows with a specific beat. 3 longer lines followed by a shorter, punchy one like a sigh after a yearning thought. It's delicate and melodic, like breath rising and falling in the quiet moment between lovers. She'd perform these songs when surrounded by women, students, companions, maybe even nuns. These gatherings, sometimes ritual, sometimes educational, were free spaces where emotion, music, and the body weren't split but whole through these performances. Sappho trained others in the art of creation, not just crafting poems, but building a culture. We can only imagine how that sounded. The gentle pluck of strings, her clear voice, the hush of listeners, as many of her poems don't start with statements, but with questions or pleas, like the opening lines of a chat or a prayer. Come to me, goddess Aphrodite on her throne, and free me from my pain. These poems reach out to gods and tap into deep desires, yet somehow feel surprisingly modern. Today, you could play music to them, and they'd still stir something raw and real. Sappho turned poetry into song, and by doing that, she reminded the world that emotions are music. Every ache, every shiver of touch, every tremble in a voice deserves a melody. Her words still echo centuries later, with every line of Sappho's poetry we have. Dozens, maybe hundreds more are lost. What's left are fragments, shards of feeling and sound, snippets pulled from original songs, drifting through time. Some are full stanzas, others just whispers, a single word, a flicker of longing, a thought that ends without a start. But even these fragments are bursting with life, like embers glowing in the ashes of something that once blazed bright. So why did so much disappear? Time, war, and deliberate destruction. Sappho's works were once collected into 9 volumes, safely stored in the famous library of Alexandria. They might have been copied and celebrated across the ancient world, but when that library went up in flames, a ton of ancient literature went missing. Later, as Christianity gained power, Works seen as pagan or immoral were suppressed, forgotten, or deliberately burned. Sappho's passionate poetry, especially her love for women, made her a target by the Middle Ages. She was a ghost. Her name survived, but her voice was almost silenced, only through quotes by other authors in grammar books, commentaries, or philosophy did fragments of her poetry escape extinction. These excerpts were usually cited for style or vocabulary, not their emotional power, but the feelings still pour through. Then came the papyrus. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, archaeologists digging in the sands of Oxyrhynchus, Egypt, uncovered thousands of ancient manuscript scraps, including faded and torn lines of Sappho's writing, poems unheard for over 1,000 years. More discoveries followed. In 2004, a nearly complete poem was found on a papyrus wrapped around a mummy in Germany. Every recovery felt like a resurrection. Still, a lot is missing today. We read her words in Echoes. What we long for isn't just what she wrote, but what she might have said if history had let her speak, uninterrupted. Yet there's something haunting about surviving. Through these fragments, Sappho wrote about impermanence, fleeting moments, beauty, slipping through fingers like sand. So maybe it's fitting her poetry reaches us not as a monument, but as a mystery, a puzzle pieced together by lovers of language, music, and the heart. A voice once drowned in flames still burns. Sappho's poetry was so raw it couldn't escape judgment. When alive, she was admired, hailed as a master of lyric poetry. Plato called her the 10th muse, placing her among the divine. But centuries passed, cultures shifted, and her legacy was twisted, silenced, or scandalized depending on the era. Why? Because she wrote about love, not the kind. History likes to remember comfortably. Most of her poems focus on deep feelings and desire for women, distorted, silenced, or scandalized depending on the era. Why? Because she wrote about love, not the usual type of history that people usually feel comfortable recalling. Most of her poetry focuses on deep feelings and longing for women. She praises their beauty, mourns their absence, admits jealousy, and celebrates their closeness in her world. This was nothing unusual in the cultural setting of Lesbos, especially among noble women. Close and possibly romantic relationships were accepted, even celebrated, but later generations, especially those following Roman, Christian, and Victorian values, struggled with this. Instead of facing the truth, they rewrote it. A tragic romantic, heartbroken over a man, and even made up a myth about her jumping off a cliff to kill herself over a boatman named Phaon. Spoiler, that's nowhere in her original work. This fake story was just to erase her weirdness, make her pain more palatable, and normalize her desires. Some critics saw her poetry as purely educational or idealistic. Others flat out dissed her for being scandalous, but she hung in there. Even through the scandal, Sappho's name stayed intact in the 19th century, when talking openly about same-sex love was still taboo. Her legacy quietly became a coded symbol for some queer identity. The words sapphic and lesbian literally come from her name. Hometown, she became, whether she wanted it or not, a rebellious icon, a poetic ancestor for those with love that society tried to crush. And even today, the debates rage on. Who was she really? A teacher, a lover, a legend, a threat. But maybe the better question is, why are we still afraid of her truth? Sappho didn't write to fit any genre. She wrote what she felt, named beauty, admitted desire, lived through her verses. Her scandal wasn't in what she did, but in her honesty. She dared to write about longing. So history tried to silence her voice, but never quite managed it. If there's a divine presence shadowing Sappho's life and work, it's Aphrodite, goddess of love, beauty, and irresistible desire. For Sappho, Aphrodite wasn't just a myth. She was her muse, her confidant, even her companion in moments of passion and pain. Many of Sappho's most powerful poems aren't just about love. They're prayers to Aphrodite, pleas, begging. Arguments made in verse when the weight never managed to do that. If there was any divine presence overshadowing Sappho's life and work, it was Aphrodite, the goddess of love, beauty, and irresistible desire. For Sappho, Aphrodite wasn't just a myth, so she was her muse, her soulmate, even her companion in moments of passion and pain. Many of Sappho's strongest poems aren't just about love. They're prayers to Aphrodite, pleas, favors asked, arguments made in verses when the weight of longing became too much to bear. In her most famous surviving poem, Ode to Aphrodite, Sappho doesn't just praise the goddess, she talks to her directly, almost like a friend who's been through this pain before. Come to me now. If you've ever answered my call before, please free me from this misery. Make all my heart's wishes come true. There's zero shame in being that vulnerable. No fear in showing desire. Sappho's love was never described as sinful or weak. It was sacred, something noble enough to bring a goddess down from heaven. Back in the day, Aphrodite wasn't just about romance. She ruled attraction, charm, physical harmony, and the agony of separation. Calling on her meant admitting love can hurt as much as it thrills. Sappho nailed that double-edged sword perfectly. She didn't sugarcoat love. She lived in its contradictions. She wrote about its sweetness and bitterness, its beauty and cruelty. In another poem, she said, "Love shakes my soul like the wind on a mountain, rattling the oak trees. Here, love isn't gentle, it's violent, primal, something that tears you apart without asking for permission." By putting Aphrodite at the heart of her emotional world, Sappho elevated desire into legend. Her poetry blurs the line between personal and divine, between everyday feelings and cosmic power, and, in doing so, she helped build a literary legacy where love wasn't just a topic, it was a worship. For Sappho, Aphrodite wasn't some abstract deity. She was a mirror, a force reflecting every fierce, chaotic, beautiful thing about the human heart. And in every line of Sappho's poetry, the goddess of love listens and answers back. Like her poems, Sappho's death is a mystery wrapped in legend. Nobody knows exactly when she died, how old she was, or even where she spent her last years. Some say she passed peacefully on the island of Lesbos, surrounded by the sea and the songs she loved. Others, especially later Roman poets, spun tragic fables that she threw herself off the white cliffs of Lefkada, heartbroken over unrequited love for a handsome boatman named Phaon. But there's zero historical proof for that tale. Looks like it's just a literary invention, a way male-dominated tradition reshaped her love and suffering into a straight-up hetero-tragedy. It turns the fierce poetic voice of a woman who loved women into a victim pining for a man. Maybe it's a neat ending, but it's a fake one. The real story is simpler and deeper. Sappho vanished quietly, just like she appeared after her death. Her work lived on for centuries. Philosophers studied her, playwrights quoted her, and her songs were performed all over ancient Greece. Her poetry was preserved in 9 books, a treasure trove of lyric verse. For a while, her fame rivaled Homer's, but history isn't kind to voices that challenge its norms. With the rise of the Roman Empire and later Christian moral codes, Sappho's emotional and sensual poems, especially those celebrating love between women, fell out of favor. Her works stopped being copied. Her collections were left to gather dust in libraries, eventually burned or crumbled away. Some believe early church officials deliberately destroyed her poems because they thought her songs were dangerous. By the Middle Ages, her name survived, but most of her words were lost. It took over 1,000 years before fragments of her poems resurfaced, dug up from Egyptian trash heaps, or quoted in ancient grammar books. Piece by piece, she was reborn, not through myth, but survival. Her death might have been forgotten by time, but no longer copied. Her books were left to rot in libraries and eventually burned or collapsed. Some believe her works were deliberately destroyed by early church officials who thought her songs were way too dangerous. By the Middle Ages, her name survived, but most of her words had vanished. It took over 1,000 years for her fragments to resurface, dug up from Egyptian trash heaps, or quoted in ancient grammar books. Piece by piece, she was reborn, not through legend, but survival. Her death might have been forgotten by time, but her disappearance was never complete. She lingered in whispers, in secret marginal notes, in the stubborn pain of voices refusing to be forgotten. Sappho didn't need a heroic death. Her poems became immortal, and in the gaps where her words once lived, we can still feel her spirit, desire unfinished, but never truly gone. Sappho's life may have slipped into darkness, her poems scattered and incomplete, but her impact, that's never faded. If anything, it just got stronger, like a candle that just refuses to blow out. Every era finds a way to rediscover her. During the Renaissance, scholars nerded out over her work, amazed by her finely tuned emotional control. Then the Romantics, poets like Byron and Shelley, name-dropped her like she was the original heartbreaker. Come the 19th and 20th centuries, with conversations about gender and identity bubbling up, Sappho became this badass symbol of lesbian resilience, feminine artistry, and emotional freedom. Her name still echoes in language. Sapphic is the go-to word for romantic love between women. Lesbian folks moved beyond the little island where she lived to claim a global identity. These words, not just jargon, they're echoes of her life, proof that a voice can ripple through millennia and still reshape how we get love and express it. Artists, writers, musicians still hooked on her vibe. Painters imagined her bathing in moonlight. Poets have translated her work over and over, chasing the heartbeat beneath every word. Modern authors have revived and reimagined her in novels, songs, and plays. And through it all, one thing stays clear. Sappho touched on something universal. Doesn't matter if her poems got mangled. Doesn't matter if her biography is a bit fuzzy. What matters is the fire burning beneath those words, the trembling joy of desire, the sting of heartbreak, the sacredness of beauty. Those are feelings we all know. She just found a way to sing them. Maybe that's her real immortality, not marble statues or dry academic footnotes, but how a few lines from over 2,000 years ago can still make someone stop, breathe, and feel a little less alone. Sappho's talent wasn't just poetry, it was presence. She turned feeling into art. She made longing into a kind of truth, and in doing so, she became more than a poet. She became a mirror for anyone whose. She turned longing into a kind of truth, and in doing so, she became more than a poet. She became a mirror for anyone who's ever loved quietly, deeply, or against the world. And as long as human hearts break and heal through language, Sappho lives on, not just remembered, but felt.